morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm so happy to join you all at conference this week. It's been great. My name is Bernadette St. I was a Global Mission Fellow, or a Young Adult Missionary, with the General Board of Global Ministries from summer of 2017 until about a week ago.
Wow.
I served in northern Tanzania in a village called Gamasara with a local organization called the Emmanuel Center for Women and Children. I worked with local community leaders to advocate for the rights and health of women and girls. We spent a lot of time talking about why people love their community and the things that are painful and the things that they wanted to change. We talked with women and men. We talked with families and community groups. We also listened. People had a lot of things to tell us. In short, my job was to help this community tell their stories, because until people could listen to each other, nothing would change. And you know, stories can do a lot of things. They can be therapeutic, they can unite people and build community, and they can spark change. For people who have gone through very difficult things, talking about those hard times can be really, really difficult. Like the woman who thought she was going to die while in labor because her doctor couldn't help her and left the room. Or the little boy who grows up watching his mother getting beaten by his father over and over again for years. It can take years before someone is prepared to speak about those things out loud. But there are other stories that are quick to be told, like the process of building the local church over years and years, and now that it's finished, why it has 6 sides. Or the story of how Tanzania gained independence and was guided safely through its infancy as a country by the first president. And I have always believed that my story starts with my name, Bernadette. My full name is Bernadette Marie St. If you were from South Louisiana, like me, you would know a lot about me from my name. You might assume that I'm from a Catholic family, and you would be partially right. You would know that my ancestors are French and not Cajun, and why that matters. Bernadette is a name that demands your attention. Bernadette has a big ego and lots of opinions. Bernadette is right all the time. Bernadette is a combination of crazy and confident, the right mixture to go and move to Tanzania for 2 years alone, knowing no Swahili. So, Bernadette moved to Tanzania. And it didn't take me long to figure out that Bernadette Marie St. doesn't really tell a story there either. In fact, Bernadette is not even a name that most Tanzanians can pronounce. So instead, I was called Benedetta, or simply Mzungu, white person. Each day I spent in Gamasara, I witnessed women change through the stories they shared. One woman spoke of the joy of being able to send her child to school, even though her husband was not able to pay the fees. One woman rejoiced when the sturdy cement block house she had been slowly building for years was finally finished and she could move in with her children. One terrified woman spoke about being circumcised, how decades later she still remembers what it felt like, and how she felt betrayed by her family for coercing her into the ceremony. I learned that when one woman is brave enough to share a difficult story, other women rallied with similar experiences, but hadn't spoken out before because they thought they were alone, and didn't bother to share, lest they be ignored or chastised. But once the stories were told, they were no longer the burden of any one person. Rather, the weight of those stories was spread across an entire community of women. And one woman's story became the story of all the others, too. And slowly, those stories that the women told ended with messages of hope and healing, and sometimes even a call to action. Meanwhile, I was still Benedetta. Benedetta wasn't very confident. She was afraid to speak because people laughed at her Swahili. She sat in the back of the room because her white skin attracted stares no matter where she was. She didn't want to ruffle feathers or cause offense in a place that was so different from her home. I knew that Bernadette would never be a part of Tanzania, that Bernadette's story would never be a part of Tanzania. But I also didn't want to embrace being Benedetta, this meek and scared person that I was ashamed of becoming. Then, one day, Benedetta made it into someone else's story. Benedetta, I, had agreed to stay with my good friend Sarah until she had her baby. And the very first night I stayed in her home, Sarah woke me up in the early hours of the morning with birth pains. So Sarah, her husband, and I, in the utter blackness of a place with no electricity, but under a vast blanket of stars, waded through cornfields and scooted along cow paths, stopping for contractions, until we finally reached the main road, where a friend with a car waited to bring us to the hospital. We arrived in time, and Sarah's husband and I waited nervously for a few hours until a very tired nurse emerged from the delivery room with a small bundle, which she placed in my arms. Benedetta is a part of that story. And others became parts of my story, like my roommate Cynthia, who was just as terrified of mice as I, and had no problem paying a neighborhood kid to catch them for us. And there were the many stories that came from my good intentions to speak Swahili, but that were never quite enough. Like the one time at a staff training, I announced boldly and with gusto, "Yes, I am drunk," rather than "Yes, I understand." Or the time I had insisted to a very confused shopkeeper that I exchange my used underwear rather than my used soda bottles. So Benedetta didn't speak so much, but she listened. She didn't tell many jokes, but she laughed at others' jokes. Benedetta was the one that actually lived the challenge that Bernadette signed up for. My work in Tanzania was to help make room for new identities based in community and love through telling stories. I hadn't realized that Gamasara had given me the same gift when they gave me my new name, the name Benedetta. Being called something familiar to those who lived in Gamasara was an invitation to join in their community and to make space for love. So now you all have heard my story and you're now a part of it. And so I invite you to make space for a new identity and love in each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that story. I'd like to open it up a little bit if anybody has any questions for Bernadetta. Or also, I'd love for her to tell a little bit about the Global Mission Fellows Program, for those of you that might not know that.
Or if you have young folks in your
Sure.
in your congregation that might be interested in having a similar kind of experience, here's your introduction to find out more.
Yeah. A few words about the Global Mission Fellows Program. So there's a table over there that has some pamphlets and things you can go grab if you or someone you know may be interested. So it's a 2-year program for young adults, ages 20 to 30. There's 2 tracks. There's a U.S. track and there's an international track. And they're all projects that are based in justice. So if you become a Global Mission Fellow, you would be partnered with an organization either in the U.S. or somewhere else in the world that does work with the church or work that is justice-based, so work that is about building up local communities and empowering people where they are to do the work that is important.
Can you talk a little bit about the training, about the orientation, kind of how you moved from being who you were to who you are?
Yeah. So I was the international track, and so we all train together. So we recruit from all over the world, not just the United States. And we also train together. So we spent 3 weeks, people from all over the world, learning together sort of the principles of justice-based mission work, as well as sort of some program stuff. And then we sort of walked together through these 2 years. We have some webinars and we stay connected informally. And we really support each other in this process of being away from our homes and families for that amount of time. Yeah.
What's next? Are you gonna do that?
For me,
Yeah.
well, so I learned from my time that I'm really called to doing trauma healing work. So I'm going to go to grad school and focus, do a social work degree and focus on trauma healing.
I mean, that program also really emphasizes the global vision concept of from everywhere to everywhere.
Yes, from everywhere to everywhere. Yes.
Other questions?
You want to share a little bit about your living experience there?
Yeah, so I lived in the northern part of Tanzania and not in a very big city or even town really. And so it was an adjustment for me. But running water wasn't always an option. Sometimes there were mice in my house, things like that. But it was just, everything was fresh that I ate. There was a market that I could walk to every day. Didn't eat a lot of meat. I walked most places or rode a motorbike taxi because I didn't have a car. Most people didn't have cars. So it's just, it's hard to talk about because it feels very different or polarizing when I talk about it to people. But by the end, I mean, it was life. It's how I lived. So. But it was different, and I was grateful that there's an expectation that I lived closely with those I worked with, instead of sort of being far away in some nicer place, because it really changed the way